Today I've compiled over 40 demos from 3 years of posting on my channel into this one video. There's everything from putting a PDF together, moving a bust dart, to creating gathers easily on the machine, and much more. It can be hard to find a specific demo when you need it, so I'll have timestamps down below. Watch the video all the way through to see the progression in my editing skills, and don't forget to bookmark this video to reference later. Without further ado, let's get into the video. So here is my front bodice piece for the Sadie jumpsuit, which I used to adapt for my top. So when I made the toile, the waistline of the jumpsuit came up higher at the front than the back. So I've added in an inch here to account for that difference in the front and back waistline. So that should make my waistline more straight where it needs to be straight. So all I did is I cut the paper from one end to the other, but I didn't cut it right up to the end. I just left a tiny bit attached there. And then I spread it this end by an inch, put some paper underneath and taped it down. And it's as simple as that. That then gives me the bit of extra. Now I've done it this way because it is a crossover top. If it was a normal bodice piece that went straight down like that, then I would do a full bust adjustment. But this worked just fine. Just want to show you how I lower my neckline. I've quickly traced the original piece for the Ashton with the neckline as high as it naturally is on the pattern. Now I wanted the neckline 6 inches lower, so I measured 6 inches down and I've marked it there where I'm going to have my neckline. Now, when you first amend a neckline on this bit, if it's a round neck, you want it to go in for 1 centimetre or ½ an inch at a 90-degree angle. That just preserves the neckline shape at the centre front, because if you just went up like that, you'd end up with a V-neck. And if you want a V-neck, by all means, do that, but I wanted a round neck. So what I've got to do now is meet this line with this part of the shoulder. To do that, I'm going to use my curve. So I started at the shoulder, went down, started at this point and went up and met in the middle. And now you ignore this, that's no longer your line, and this is your cut line. So here's the bodice for my blusette dress. So I want to bring the neckline in a little bit and have it at 4 inches. So for the second to smallest size, here is where it stops naturally, and here. And that's 4½ inches wide, which is too long. I want to go ½ an inch further in than this. This isn't the official way to do a neck adjustment, but it is a quick and dirty way. So from here, I want to measure 4 inches, and that is there. So we'll dismiss that and we'll dismiss that. That is my seam there. And so I need to blend that in. This is the line I need to blend into. So if we just fill that bit out. So that's part of the line that is on the proper line. Now I need to blend this point here down to here. I've just taken my curve, drawn a line up to that point. Now you could adjust that line a little bit if you wanted. Perhaps if you wanted it to be a bit more shaped like that, you could even have more shape going up. It's really up to you how you want to do that. And then you do the same for this neckline. So this is the line here. This is the original line that we need to follow. So I've just gone from my new point down and round. So now we're going to do a full bust adjustment. This is super simple. First off, you need to find your apex and mark it on the pattern. You can do that by holding the pattern up against you, or you can get the measuring tape and measure from your shoulder down to your apex, and then from your side seam to your apex, and that will give you where you need to mark. So now we want to draw some lines on the pattern. You'll need your straight ruler for this. You want to draw a line from the shoulder seam down to the apex. As you can see on my picture that I've done it fairly close to the edge, but you want it at least 5/8 in. You'll want another line from the apex down to the hem and one from the apex to the centre front. On the line you've just drawn, you'll want to cut from the hem all the way up to the shoulder, going past the apex. You can see on the picture here how that has worked. You don't want to cut through the shoulder, but you want it close enough that you have a pivot point. Sometimes cutting your seam allowance from the other side and then cutting up to your seam allowance can work. And then you want to cut from the apex to the centre front, and that small line will come away completely. So now you'll want to place some pattern paper underneath. First of all, you'll want to sellotape the apex point down. So you want to open your pattern piece on the arm side as wide as you need an FBA. If you need to go up by 1 cup size, that would be 1 inch. Go up by 2 cup sizes, that would be 2 inches, etc. I did a 2-inch FBA. And then when you've got your required amount of inches open, you can then sellotape that down. The long slender rectangle that you can see on screen is the centre front piece, and you just need to move that down so it's level with the hem, as you can see in this picture. So where I've drawn those few lines, you can see there's a bit of space there, and that space in the middle is the extra space created by the FBA. So now you can sellotape your pattern all done, and you're done. What you want to do is put your front and your back piece together at the shoulders with right sides of the fabric facing each other. Once you've done that, you'll lay your ribbon across the top on the wrong side of the fabric and pin that together. So once it's pinned together, take it to your sewing machine and sew a line of stitching across, and you'll do that at 3/8 of an inch. The reason for this ribbon is so that your shoulder seam doesn't stretch out and lose shape over time. You can actually sew this seam in a straight line if you wish, because it's not going to stretch out because the ribbon's not going to let it stretch. So there is no issue there. If you prefer, you could use the lightning stitch or a zigzag stitch. If you have a serger, you could serge it, and that's what I'm going to do. So as you can see here, I have serged my shoulder seams, and I've got a little bit of excess there, and you may well too. You can either trim that off or leave it there as it is. As mine is iridescent and it's not going to pose a problem in terms of colour, I'm going to just leave it. But if it irritates you, you may want to trim that off. So now we're going to attach the sleeves to the shoulders. Now, because the front and the back side of the sleeve is the same, it doesn't matter which way or which sleeve you put on which. When you cut your fabric out, you should have put a notch in the centre, and that will be your shoulder seam. Then you'll line up each end with each end of the main piece, and then you'll want to pin it. I would advise pinning it because you have 2 different types of curve there, and they will fight against each other. In order to get an even sew, do pin all the way around. As you can see, I've pinned all around the seam line. Now you want to sew a line of stitching 3/8 of an inch all the way around. And if you're using your sewing machine, you definitely want to use a zigzag or lightning stitch for that, not a straight stitch, as this area will receive some tension when you're wearing it. So do that for both sleeve holes. For creating your neckband, you can either use the pattern piece that came with the pattern, in which case cut your strip of fabric out from that, or you can measure your neck hole and determine your length from that, and that's what I'm going to do. So all you'll want to do is start at one seam and put the tape measure round. You may want to stand the tape measure up like that. That's just because the neckline's on a curve and it will give you the most accurate measurement. So you just want to go round like that, all the way round. then round the back of the neckline to there. Mine's 34.5 inches. I want it between 20 and 30%. So I'm going to take 8 inches off, which will mean I need to cut 26.5 inches plus my seam allowance. So that's what I'm going to do now. As a side note, you can just cut on the straight grain because it's jersey fabric, it will stretch. If you've got a jersey fabric that stretches more one way than the other, you want to cut it the way with the most stretch. So I've got a scrap piece of fabric that I'm going to use here. Now I need to think in terms of how wide I want it. So I want it about 3/4 of an inch wide. So I need that to be double that because it's going to be folded over. So that's 1.5. Then I want to add a seam allowance. So I want to add a seam allowance of 3/4 of an inch. In total, I need to cut 2.25 inches wide by 26.5 inches long. But that's just mine. You need to work out your own or use the pattern piece. So I've cut my piece out now. So the first thing I'll do is put my right sides together and sew a stitch across there. I'm going to serge it, but you can use your sewing machine. So I have serged that shut now. Once you've sewn that, you'll want to press to one side or press open if you've used your sewing machine. Now you want to fold your band together like this, lengthways, and go and press that. So I've pressed that in half now. What I'm going to do, and this isn't a necessary step, but because my fabric is so flimsy, it will help me keep it together. I'm just going to serge around the edge, and that'll give me a bit more stability while I'm attaching it to the main body of the garment. So you can either serge that or you could stitch a basting stitch just around the edge, but do a wide zigzag. I've just run a rough stitch around the edge just here on my serger. I made sure not to take any excess off with the blade. The bit that's stitched will disappear when we attach our garment. So now what we need to do is divide our band up in equals, either in 4 or 8. I'm going to do 8 because that gives me more control when I'm sewing it. You want to put a pin in where your seam line is. Fold that seam line and find the other opposite end. So find the opposite end and stick a pin in there. Then you want to bring your 2 pins together, pull the band tight to find your next quarter. And then you'll do that again with the other end like this. So now you have 4 pins in the band at equal spaces. So you've got 1, 2, 3 and 4. And that might be good enough for you, but I'm going to put in another 4 just for the added security of getting the band stretched equally. So you want to take 2 pins that are sat next to each other, bring them together as you did with the pins just now, fold the band, and where your crease is where you want to put another pin. And then you just do that for the rest of the band. So as you can see now, I have 8 pins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And they're all equally placed. Now we have to do the same with the neck hole on the garment. So let's put the band aside. For this bit, rather than use pins, I'm going to use my marker. If you're going to use a marker, make sure it's a removable marker, and do test it on a scrap bit of fabric before marking your actual garment, because you don't want to ruin your garment, and this will show on the actual front. First of all, we want to find the centre of the back and the centre of the front. Just in case you think the seam lines are 1/4 of the way between the front and the back, that's not the case, and you'll see that in a minute as we measure. So I've brought my seam lines together and folded the back of the fabric. Where the fabric's on the fold there, that is your centre point of your back. So fold the front with the seams matching, pull tight, and where it's folded is where you want to make a mark. So now we have the front and the back marked. We want to bring them together in much the same way as we did with the band. You want to bring those 2 marks together and pull your fabric tight. Where it folds at the other end is where you want to mark it. And do the same for the other side. So now we have 4 marks, 1, 2, 3 and 4. And you'll notice here the mark is not on the seam line for the shoulders. Because I'm using 8 pins, I need to go ahead and put some more marks in. So I'm going to bring 2 marks together that are sat next to each other, fold the fabric and then make a mark at the other end. And then I'm going to do that for the other 3 points around the neck. So now I have 8 marks placed equally around the neckline. So I'm going to match the marks up with the pins by pinning the band to the neckline, making sure the seam lines are at the centre back for the band and that you're pinning right sides together. So now I have the neckband pinned to the garment. It's time to sew. It's at this time I pull the fabric taut to assess whether the band is the right width. And I think it is. You want to pull the band so it goes taut, and that just means it won't stand away from your shoulders when it's on you. And that looks good. As you can see, when it's relaxed, there is too much fabric on the main neckline, which is what you want. Pull it tight and you've got a nice bit of tension there. So I would advise that you go and sew a basting stitch, and you can just use a straight stitch to do that because you will sew it again when you know it's all on correct. But I'm going to go ahead now and sew it up on the serger because I'm pretty confident that it is correct. Also, if you're sewing on the serger, you may want to start at a side seam so that when your garment is on the hanger, you won't have that funny join bit from the serger showing. And also when you're wearing it, it'll be hidden under your hair, under your top. So that's what I'm going to do now. So once you've sewn your neckband, you want to just go round and check it. Make sure you have caught all the fabric in. And I haven't there. You can see, got a big hole. So I'm going to have to go over that bit again with the serger. So that looks all good now. So now I'll go and press the seam so the seam is facing down. Now I had a practice on this one, and it's a tiny bit wavy as you can see there, but it's not really. Karina spotted my mistake, and that is because I sewed it on the wrong side. I should have sewed it this way so it's following the ribs. So that's what I did next, and I had to play with that. So as you can see, that is much better because I've done it following the ribs. So it's goes across, there's the ribs vertically, and it's going horizontally across. So let me move you over to my serger. I took out the left needle as per instructions online, and I've whacked both looper dials right up to 9. A little tip, if you're going to give this a go, take a photograph of your settings before you change them, otherwise you'll never remember what they are. And then on the side, I turned the differential feed right down as far as it would go, and then I tried again. So then I tried again, and this is actually the bottom of the sleeve that I'm going to make, and that's what I created, and I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other sleeve and also the hem at the bottom of the top. So here's the hem of my other sleeve piece. So I am going to go ahead and do that now, and I'll show you how I do that. There may be some shake as my serger does shake a lot. Making sure I've got the right side of the fabric facing up, I'll start to feed it through. So I just get it a little bit in, maybe a bit more, and then I start to pull it. So I pull it tight, not too tight so it comes out, but tight enough. So there's my other one. Not quite as curly as the previous one. So the curls really happen when you're pulling the fabric taut as you go through, and you really want to sew it the way that you want the stretch. But yeah, that's it. Just remember to take off your seam allowance if you don't want your seam allowance, because this doesn't actually require any seam allowance. So you see you've got all the spokes here, and this is where you'll mark your button placement. So you could have the buttons really wide apart or not so wide apart. It's really up to you. You need to decide how many buttons you want on your garment. So say you wanted all 8, you would just then stretch that out to the length of your button area, and then it will give you evenly placed buttonholes. Now obviously you can just use a pencil and ruler, but I do think this is more accurate, and for someone like me who does struggle with accuracy, this is fantastic. I'm pretty sure I don't know the full breadth of what this contraption can do, but I don't know if you're going to see it on camera. I'll try and do a close-up, but it's got loads and loads of markings along here. On this bit, it also has markings, and at this end. So say you were doing a double-breasted jacket, you've got a marking this side and a marking this side, judging on how wide you want it. And this marking here, this side is a really long marking, so you could place your buttonhole where you wanted it on that row. So I've got my jacket here. That's about where it's going to fold over, so I want my button plackets to be between there and there. I want to get 3 spokes and stretch it out as far as I need it. Now that's as far as it will go. Just want to make sure it is evenly lined up with the edge. Now I'm going to use my chalk marker because this fabric doesn't take well to use in a friction pen, but normally I would take a friction pen, but if I do, it is going to stain my fabric, so I will be using my chalk pen. So I've just drawn a chalk mark inside the hole that the contraption gives me. So I'll take that off, and you can see I've got 3 marks there, and that is where my buttonhole is going to be. Someone did ask me, can you only use this for horizontal button placement? Which is a very good question, because I didn't think about that before I got it. If I wanted a vertical placement, I would still use it in a horizontal way. When you've got your markings, I would just use the marking as the bottom of the buttonhole and go upwards. You could then just take your ruler and do a line through it if you wanted. This is the front piece, and I'm going to stay stitch that neckline along there. Basically anywhere there's a curve, you'll want to stay stitch. So I'm going to do it on my front neckline, my back neckline, and my facing neckline. And you'll want to use quite a small stitch. Say I'll use about a 2.0 stitch, and I'll be doing it at 3/8 of an inch, so it's within the seam allowance. Right, so that's my automatic settings. I'm just going to reduce that down to 2.0 stitch. It'll be a straight stitch. Everything else will stay the same. I'll press the foot up alongside the fabric so that I'm doing 3/8. And it'll help if I threaded the machine, wouldn't it? I just need to bring it in as it's too close to my apex, so I'm going to bring it in by 1 inch. So I just measure from the point there 1 inch in. So I've just marked it 1 inch in from where it's sitting at the moment, and I've redrafted the lines so that the dart meets at this point. So now I want to rotate about 1/4 of an inch out of the neckline into this dart. So here's my notch here. We need to draw a line from the dart point to the notch like that. We want to cut that line and cut one of the legs of the dart. But you don't want to cut through the apex, just up to it. So now I've got freedom to move this. You've got to remember, whatever you're reducing it by, it will be double because this is obviously on the fold. So I'm just going to reduce it by 1/4 of an inch because I only want to take it in by about 1/2 an inch. Then you just lap it over. Let me get my sellotape. So you just fold it over to the point where you want to move it in. Sellotape it down, and as you'll see over here, there is a little bit of a gap under the dart, and that's just moved the excess from up here into the dart. I've just got a thin bit of paper that I'm going to slot underneath, and then I'll sellotape that down. So now we have to true up the sides. So you'll see there my bit of paper is sticking out, and I'm just going to chop off the side like that. On here, there's a bit of a jog there. I don't know if you can see, there is a little bit of a jog just there. So I just need my curve, Frederick, to just even that out. So I've just drawn a line there to match up that. So I've cut that off. Now it's perfect. Right, so I'm just going to cut out the back piece for the fuller cardigan, which is cut on the fold, and I'm doing it on stripey fabric, so I thought I would show you how I do it to make sure the stripes are even. So first of all, I get the bottom edge and I line it up on the edge of one of the stripes. I've also got a vertical line going down there, so I line it up with a vertical line as well. So I've put a few pins in, but not many, because I'm going to flip this over in a minute. So I get a pen and I just draw the stripe lines on some of the lines, as that will help me to line it up when I flip it over. Then I get my scissors. So I've cut it all around the edge. Now we take the pins out and we flip it over with that line that we lined it up with before, and the line going across the bottom to make sure it's all level, and then we pin again. So making sure it lays flat against the stripe, being sure that the marks you made on your pattern piece for your stripes are matching up exactly. So here's the bit we cut out just now. This is the other side, and when you're happy that you've got it all pinned correctly, you can cut it out. Make sure to clip your notches on this side as well, and you've got your whole back piece. We fold it over like that. It's cut down the centre back, it's cut exactly straight, and the stripes on the sides match up, and you've got a straight line against the stripes on the bottom. Now this works really well with this fabric because it's woven stripes, but if it was print, you would need to make sure the print was printed on grain. But there you go, there's my back piece. So now I've got the two front pieces and they're not cut on the fold. So what we need to do is fold this fabric over, but make sure it's matching exactly. On this fabric, I don't know if you can see, it's super easy to match it up because we've got this straight line going down here, but we've also got these grey stripes going across. So what you can do now is lay your pattern piece on the fabric and cut both sides out. But to ensure extra accuracy, I'm going to cut them two out separately. We lay this piece out. So because the bottom of the bodice piece is a straight line, I'm just going to line it up with a straight line of the stripe. So we've got a bit of a straight line here as well. So I am actually going to match that up with a vertical straight line and then pin. So as I did on the back piece, I'm just going to mark down where the actual stripes are at a few different places. This will help me align when I do the other side. When we're wearing the piece, we want the two front sides to look exactly the same. Otherwise it'll look odd when we're wearing it. So before we take this paper off to cut our other piece, just want to mark in our notches. So we've only got one notch and one dart leg, and we want to mark the actual point of the dart. For this we want to use an erasable marker. There, got my dart legs all drawn in up to the side. You want to test your pen on a scrap bit of paper first and iron it off, because you do not want that pen mark left on. And then we get our other bit of fabric and we turn our pattern piece on the wrong side, line it up just as we did with the other piece. You want to check the little marks you made on your pattern piece align with your stripe, and mine don't there, so I've got to amend that slightly. They do now, so I can now cut my second piece out. So I made sure to line it up vertically as I did with the other piece and horizontally on the stripe. So now we just got to make sure to put our notches in and our dart leg, and then we want to mark our dart apex with our removable pen. So now I've got my two front pieces, and you can see the stripes match across here and all the way up, in fact, and so that's going to look really good when we're wearing it. Hi guys, I'm cutting out my fabric and I've run into a little bit of a problem, and that is I haven't got enough fabric to cut out the back piece. So I cut out the front piece and I cut out the sleeves, and I just was about 2 or 3 inches short width-wise of cutting this out, so I've come up with a solution. So you might see I've drawn a blue line along the grain line, and that is just 2 inches in. I folded that over, and then I was able to cut my pieces out. Now traditionally this is cut on the fold, and I haven't cut it on the fold. I did cut down along that line. So what I need to do is add in a bit of fabric to make up for this bit that I folded over. So let me show you what I've done. I've got one side there. I've got my long piece there. And I've got my other piece here. So this will give you a rough idea of what the back is going to look like. So I've just added an extra strip, and for visual interest I turn the lines up the other way, and I'm just going to sew it to both sides, and then that'll make the piece as big as I needed it to be. And that was just a little workaround in order to not waste all this fabric. So I had to decide on the dimensions. Now the length is just going to be the length of this, so from the hem to the neck. But width wise we've got 2 inches that I saved there by turning up. Because that's doubled over, that'll be 4 inches. Plus I wanted to add 3/8 on each side for the seam allowance. 2 lots of 3/8 is 3/4 of an inch, plus the 4 inches for the actual fabric that's missing. So that's 4 4/4. Basically I measured across this way, but because I wanted to be quite specific by cutting on the stripes, I just got as near as I could to that 4 3/4 inch. So yeah, I'm just shy of 5 inches there, but that's absolutely fine, because then I can sew within these little blue lines. So I just wanted to go through with you the collar, because it is a little bit complex if this is the first time using a pattern. What you need to do is attach your collar first by the under collar. So the top collar is on top, your under collar is underneath. So under collar right sides together with the back, and then you pin it all along, matching notches with the under collar, leaving the upper collar free. Then you get the top part of the facing, which I've got here, and attach it there matching the notches like that. You do it on both sides. So up until your facing finishes, you pin all layers. So that's the back, the under collar, the upper collar and the facing up to the edge of the facing there on both sides. And then in the middle bit, you just pin the under collar, not the upper collar. So what we're going to do now is we're going to sew from one edge all along till we get to the edge of the facing. Then we're going to move the upper collar out the way, carry on sewing till we get to the edge of the other facing, and then we'll sew all layers again till we get to the other edge. And then afterwards you will fold that under and sew it, and it won't be seen. So I just thought I'd go through that because it took me a little while to work it out. So I've just sewn right across as explained. It does tell you to clip in this little corner just near the edge of the facing, but I didn't do that until after I'd sewn it, just because it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and so I didn't want to go too far, but I just was very careful when I was sewing it. And so now it's time to turn it round, and you can see you've got a really clean finish there. And then with the middle bit, we'll put the seam allowance up, fold it under, and we'll just stitch it down. And the stitching will be on the middle of the back of the collar, so no one's going to see that stitching from the outside of the garment. In order to pattern match, I've just laid this pattern piece on top of this pattern piece in the right place. So just where it's marked on there, I've laid the pattern piece on top of there and traced through it. On here you can see my drawings at the top and the bottom, and then I use that as guides, lay it on the fabric and cut it out. Here's an extra bit of fabric that just goes out 3/8 of an inch, and then what you do is you double fold itself and it becomes a vent. This section here, if you take off the hem, which is an inch, there, that bit will become a vent. I found it to be quite messy on the first one I made, and I think if I could do a mitred corner, that would be better. So I'm planning ahead with this one. Here's the stitch line there. It very helpfully gives you the stitch line. And an inch out from there, don't know if you can see my line, but I've just drawn it there. That's a bit better. You can see that now. So I've drawn a line an inch out from the seam line. Because the hem is an inch long that way, I need an inch to play with that way, because with a mitred corner you need the two corners to be equal. Well, you don't, but it just makes it a lot easier. Just going to extend my pattern piece out to that line for the vent. So this is my front bodice pattern. Here is the centre front. So here is the tip of the V, and it goes up to the strap there. So what I found when I tried on my toile was that the strap sits too wide. So this is the sleeve or the arm side. So that's the armhole. I need to keep the width because the width was nice. So I just need to redraft this top bit so that the strap sits a bit closer this way. So there's a really simple way of doing that, and I'm going to show you that now. So you'll need some paper. I've just sellotaped 2 A4 pieces together. You're going to need a pen. I would recommend you use a pencil or a biro, but I am using this. So we've got a join line for the pattern piece just there. If you haven't got that, say you use the A0, just draw a horizontal line across, lining it up with the centre front so you know it's straight. So you'll get a ruler, line the ruler up with the edge there, and then just draw a line. I don't need to do that because I've got this line here, and I'm going to use that line. So as you can see, I've got that line lining up with the bottom of the paper there. So I've got the edge of the centre front alongside this line, this cut line of this paper. This would be the centre front of our new pattern piece. However much you want to move it towards your centre front, measure that on your pattern piece. So I want to move mine over by 1 inch. So I've measured 1 inch in there. So I've moved my pattern piece towards me over here 1 inch. So the inch point lines up with the edge there. So as you can see, I've marked it in pen there. As you can see, I've just quickly traced around the top edge of the pattern piece. So if we line it up again, there we go, so it's exactly where it should be. So you want to move the centre front of the pattern piece over to meet the edge of the paper again. And line it up with your line that you've drawn here. Line that up with the bottom of the paper again. And you can see there that my pattern piece, the new one I've drawn, is moved over from the actual, this one that I have here. So what we want to do now is carry on that line and then go down like that. There we have most of the top of our pattern piece, but we have a little adjustment to make. When we line this up, you see the new shape is quite a bit higher than the pattern piece. So in order to have the same front of the original design, just mark where that pattern piece starts, which is there, which is about, for me, it's 3/4 of an inch lower. Then you want to get your ruler, so then you want to draw a line from your new mark on the original centre front up to your strap line. If you wanted thicker straps, you could just adjust that by putting some extra width on each side and then blending the curve in. And don't forget, whatever you've done on this front piece, you also need to do on your back piece. So I've just put the first page and the second page of the tank together. So let's do the next page. So you'll see here you've got a dashed line and a solid line. You want to get your next piece of paper and butt it up against the solid line. So no cutting necessary. You just literally take this piece of paper and put it up against a solid line on there. And obviously you want to line it up with all your lines going across, making sure. But before you do that, you need to glue it down or use sellotape, it's up to you. And it's as simple as that. And you just carry on doing it along, and then you'll do it down here as well. You'll see the solid line, the bit of paper that goes here, you'll just butt up against this solid line. And it's as simple as that. Putting PDFs together a lot easier than you might think. So I've got my bodice pieces here and I need to lengthen them. This pattern is designed for a person of 5'5". I'm 5'6". So for every inch you are bigger or smaller, you need to amend it 1/2 inch. And that's on the lengthen and shorten line there at the waistline. But I want to lengthen it to cover my bum as well. So I've drawn in my own lengthen line here. And that is because I want to lower it about 3 inches. If I do it there, it will elongate my waist. But if I do it there, it'll add the length to my hips, which is what I want. Just got some printer paper here. I line it up at this edge, that just saves me cutting it again. So I want to lower it 1/2 inch. So here's my cut line. And you just add 1/2 inch to the cut line and then line up the bottom piece with that line you've drawn. Make sure your vertical lines match up. Then you want to true the edge. This side is pretty much done. And that's your waist lengthened. Now, because I want to have extra length, I've got another cut line here. Get our other piece of paper. So now I've got a long piece. Pull it under here. Again, match up the edge. Now I'm thinking 3 inches, but that was just a random number. I'm actually going to go with 2 inches, just for ease, because this ruler is 2 inches wide. Plus I've got the 1/2 inch up here, so it is lengthened by 2.5. So you line your ruler up with the width you want and then draw your length line in. Then we put the other piece back on like so, and just make sure your line lines up. You might want to draw a line vertically and that'll help you out. Then you can see where this goes, and then just true the edge off, and that is one piece done. And then you just need to do the same to your other piece. So now I'm going to attach this neck binding to this. I've sewn one shoulder seam up but not the other, that's quite important, and I need to attach this. So what I've done is I've treated this inside circle as one straight line, then I divided it in two and put a pin there, and then I divided it into quarters and I've got a pin there and there. On here I've got quarter marks all along. So what I will do, the marks on here I will match up with these pins. So what we can do now is go to the sewing machine and sew a straight stitch. As you do, you'll need to stretch that, as the actual main piece will be longer than the binding. So this is my neck binding, and I found when I attached it, it was a little bit too small. That's just because my fabric isn't as good as the fabric recommends. So what I've done is I've recut the binding and just left some length on the end past the end of the pattern piece. I will attach it and then see how I get on and then chop it off after the end of the pattern. You'll see what I mean. As I go around, I'm just stretching it slightly. As long as I stretch it the same each time, it should be okay. And you can see there I've got quite a bit left over, so I only needed to add just a little bit, and I'll cut that off when I go through the serger. So as you can see there, the main body piece is longer. Under the sewing machine I'll just stretch it out. So now I'm just going to do a straight stitch. So you can see I've sewn a line of stitch in there and it's slightly gathered on the inside. So what we want to do is press the binding up. So use the iron and press like that all the way round, because in a minute we're going to wrap the binding around the seam allowance like that, pin it in place. So I look like that on the front. So I've done snips all along, and that'll just mean it'll lay better. So now what I want to do is I want to wrap the binding over. I have to say, I'm not a fan of doing this. This is a much more fiddly way than my usual way of doing it, of just attaching binding. But because the pattern states to do it this way, I thought I'd give it a go. I did try it on my toile and messed it up significantly. So I've pinned all around the binding now. So now I need to check on the other side that it's all equal, like the width is equal. My next step is to sew these shoulder seams together. I've sewn the other shoulder seam, so now I'm just going to go around and press the seam in place. So I've just gone round quickly and hand basted all of this. I'm going to sew just under the red binding so it's more camouflaged. Well, not massively camouflaged, but it will be a little bit. You can also sew just on the binding, just before the edge, as you would a normal binding if you want. The choice is really up to you. So I'm just sewing with a straight stitch. So on my bottom protrudes quite a bit, and it often means the back skirt at the bottom, the hem, rides up so it's not level with the front. Now I need to do a full bottom adjustment of 1 inch, and so this is how I'm going to do it. It's just my way of doing it. There's lots of ways you can do it, but this is mine. So here at the top at the waist, this is not at your waist because you do have a waistband. Now with the Ravina, there's 3 different types of waistband. that you need. So you'll need to assess how much higher your waistband is. So what you need to assess is where the fullest part of your bottom is. So if we just say my fullest part is here, so basically we need to open this up. This is your side seam here, and you do not want to alter your side seam because otherwise it won't match your front side seam that you need to sew to it. So what you want to do is draw a line, line it up with your grain line. Now I've got an on the fold line here, so that is my grain line. So I now have this. I need to cut it open, but not all the way over here. So you'll just cut up to the seam line, then go around the other side and cut to your cut point, but not through it, so you leave a little hinge. Then you'll need to get some more paper. I've just put a bit of sellotape on there to keep it in place. And then you want to measure from that line up however much you need. As this is a miniature one, I've just drawn a line 1/4 of an inch, but it is really an inch that I would need. And then you just line it up, sellotape it down, true it off. You need to make sure that this line remains a straight line. And I've got a little bit excess there, so I need to put a bit of sellotape there. So I've lined it up and I've drawn my line. As you can see, there is a little bit of difference there. And there's my finished one, and that should be level now when I try to do it. I've got some changes to make. The first change I want to make is to bring the neckline down by 4 inches, because it's, so you would have seen in my 12 footage that it sits really high on my neck. So I want to reduce it 4 inches. So that's there where you can see that line. And because I'm lowering it so much, it's going to open the neckline up, because here is the bust and it will need a dart there. But because this is a raglan, it's going to be super easy to sort that out. So I'm going to take about 1/2 inch off the top there. So what we do now depends on what shape neckline you want. If you wanted a V, you could do a diagonal line from point to point. I don't want a V. It comes with a round neck, so I'm going to keep that style. So what I need to do now is draw a line around. That's where my curve comes in handy. When you're drawing a neckline in on the centre front, this is on the fold here, you want for about 3/8 to 1/2 inch, you want it to be a 90-degree angle. If it's not, it will go into a slight V. The amount that I've marked it, you keep it 90 degrees and then you curve round. All you want to do is line up your ruler until you get a curve that you're happy with, and then draw your line, and that will be my new neckline. So the next thing I need to do, because I took a little bit off the shoulder seam, so here is where the sleeve will join. Because I've taken 1/2 inch off there, I need to also take that off the sleeve piece. So because I took, this is the front seam for the sleeve, and because I took 1/2 inch off the front seam on the front bodice pattern piece, I need to take the same off there. So I'm just going to take 1/2 inch there and grade it into nothing. So we've done the front piece, we now need to do the back piece. I'm just going to lower the neckline 1/2 inch. So I've just marked 1/2 inch, then I just find a nice curve, then I find the curve that the designer has used, and then just move that down. So I've shaved 1/2 inch off the back neckline. That will open it up a little bit more. But because we've taken it off the side there, we will need to take it off the back sleeve piece as well. Over here you need to lower it by the same amount that you opened the back up, and for me that was 1/2 inch, so it's about there. And then over here also lower it the amount that you opened the front up, and that was also 1/2 inch. These two here are my sleeve seams. So that'll be the sleeve on the raglan. I've just rounded that up and then taken it in 1/2 inch there and 1/2 inch there. So there's a few different ways you can do this. You can open it up down the centre and just open it up, and then you can just pinch out at the top on the edges, or you can just add to the side seams if you've only got a little bit to add. But I'm going to go with the other option, and that is from here down to here. I'm going to draw a line and split it open. So and on this side as well. So you want to cut up to the edge of the paper but not through it, because you need to be able to rotate it, and we'll do the same this side. So now we've got this situation going on. Just going to get some paper. I'm going to need to make it quite long, and then we put that under there, sellotape it at the bottom and at the top, but not on your join. You've got to decide how much you're going to open up. Because I want to open up an inch, I'm going to do 1/2 inch on each side. So I've drawn my 1/2 inch line in, and then I just line that up. You have to beware when you do it this way, more of the width will be at the bottom. So we're quickly going to true this piece. Truing just means to make sure it's all lined up. Traditionally, you should probably do this with a pen and a ruler, but I like the quick and dirty way. So that's one side done. So that is my sleeve piece amended. This is the back piece, and the back piece is cut on the fold, so it's a straight line here. However, I've got quite a bit of excess around here, and obviously this pattern wasn't designed to be this length. I've added in 10 inches there, and so obviously that's caused some issues. So what I'm going to have to do is shape in this back, because I put some pins in around like here, and it really helped. So what I'm going to do is actually not cut it on the fold, because you can't really cut it on the fold when you're shaping the back. So it will be 2 back pieces. I'm going to remember to put my seam allowances in, and then I'm going to add some shaping. So I've got my toile here, and you can see here where my pins are. So the shaping will start about here. I just lost a pin, but it's going to sort of maybe go up to there. So I took it in about 1 inch. I'm not going to do quite 1 inch. I think I'm going to take it in 1/2 inch. Don't forget, I'm going to do another 12, so we'll see what it looks like. And then I've just lined the top up there and on that line. I don't know if you can really see it. It starts here, ends here, it's drawn there, won't go over the sellotape there. And then shapes back round. Now you can see I've got a bit of shaping. We're going to cut some bias strips. So you can see on here I've got diagonal lines, they're going to help me. This is the fabric I've got, and this line I've ripped the fabric, so I know that that is ripped on the straight grain. We need it on the diagonal. I've got a removable ink pen. Here, what we want, drawn that circle, it says 45. So this line going across here is the 45-degree angle. So I'm making a mark there and there. So this is the line, and that's just both sides of the ruler. Line the ruler up with those marks. I'm drawing a line because I can't use my rotary cutter because it's blunt at the moment. So I'm drawing a line so that I can cut. Got to work out how wide I want my strips. These are my bias makers. I'm going to use this one, which is 18 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch. It says there it's 3/4 of an inch. So I think if we go with 1 1.25 inches, then that should be fine. You should, don't know if you can see, but I've got a line just going there. You need to line the line up at 1 1.25 inches. Now, because I've moved the fabric, it's not totally level. I think that'll do. So I don't know if you can see here. but I've cut 3 lines. So I've got 1 line, 2 line, 3 line. So I'm just going to cut those lines and then stitch them together. So I've got 3 strips now, and they're cut on the bias. Look, they're nice and stretchy. If I'd cut these on the straight grain, they wouldn't be stretchy and they wouldn't go round the curve that is my neckline. What I need to do is turn them into 1 strip. So you get 1 piece and then you cross the other piece over with it, and then you need to sew a diagonal line of stitching. So you'll see when it's done, it'll be 1 piece, and then you'll trim this excess bit off. Just want to leave about 3/8, trim that side and trim that side, and then it's much neater. So now we need to iron it. So make sure it's on the appropriate heat. My iron just is automatic. So in order to reduce bulk, I've just opened that seam and pressed. As you can see, here is the width of my sleeve. So I've created 2 bands, and they are 90% of the width of this, and that it just means that it won't gather it, but it'll bring it in so it sits comfortably on the arm. So what I've done here is put a pin in 4 equal parts. Then I've got my sleeve here. You need to put a pin in 4 equal parts. Actually, you don't need to, because you've got your seam lines. Bring your seam lines together like that. I'm not going to use a pin. I'm going to mark it with a pen. So now I've got a mark either side there, and I've got my seam lines. So that's 4 equal sections. So now we turn the dress in the right way. The band over there, and then you want the band upside down so that all the raw edges meet. Where you've got the seam line on the band, you want to align that with the underarm seam so that it won't be shown when you're wearing it. So what I've done now is I've attached with pins all the way around in equal quarter parts. Do the other sleeve, and then I'll take them both over to the sewing machine and sew a seam 3/8 from the edge, and then I'll serge it to tidy it up. So there's my finished cuff, and I've done that on both sleeves. So what I'm going to do to hem it, because this is quite a lightweight fabric, a very lightweight fabric in fact, I'm going to go around with the iron and I'm going to turn it up by 1/2 inch. Once I've ironed that, I'm going to turn it up again by another 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to sew that down, and I'm going to sew it very close to the edge. So I've done a basting stitch all the way around at 1/2 inch, and then ironed the seam up. So I'm going to remove the basting stitch and then fold it again and iron it again. So here's my sleeve for the Antrim dress. Now the sleeve is too small. This is a size 22, which is the size bodice I need, but I actually need a size 30. So what I could do is do a full bicep adjustment. So open it up, open it there and spread it. It'll mean they're the same length around here. What I think I'd quite like to do is a flutter sleeve. So all I need to do is make sure there's lots more excess down here. So how we're going to do it is we're going to fold it in half. So that fold line is my centre point. And now I'm going to separate it. Let's have a look. So if we draw some lines, you want to make sure that it is even on both sides. And we just want a few different lines like this. You can just do straight lines, but for some reason I've decided vertical lines. So I've got lots of red lines there now, and now I need to cut from the bottom up to the tip, but not quite there. You need a little hinge on the end because the top side is going to be untouched. Now what I'm going to do is spread it out, but you want it spread out evenly. I will put a bit of paper underneath, and then we'll trace off our new pattern piece. So I've anchored the top bit there and the bottom bit, so that's not going to move, but the space in between needs to be equal on all parts so that it flutters enough. So I want 2 inches between that piece and the next piece. So just mark 2 inches along and line up, same on this side. The reason I'm doing so many inches, I would probably normally do a little bit less, but I need a bicep adjustment, so this is going to help with that. Just to recap, I've drawn lines in equal spots, cut them up to the point but not through it, and then spread them 2 inches each. And then I've drawn a line all around there. So now I've got my new sleeve piece, but I'm going to trace it because obviously that's a little bit awkward to have it like that. So here's my 2 back pieces. So I'm going to baste them together, open them up wrong sides together like that. Now, as I did with my last one, which you saw in the last video, I'm just going to put some of that inside the shoulder seam. Right, I've treated the back piece, so we've got 2 pieces of one. It's got stabilising inside. So here I've got my 2 waistband pieces. So this is a ruche piece, this is the normal piece. We've got 2 pieces here. And what's going to happen is we will ruche these and it'll have that little ruching on the front in the waistband. So what I'm going to do is run a line of basting stitches down the edges on all 4 sides. You should probably do 2 lines of stitches, but I'll just do the 1. The instructions tell you to lay your lining piece like this and then lay your ruche piece on top. I don't see the point of that. I think if we lay it that way, when you take your garment off, you're going to see the right side on the inside. And I just think that's going to look better because you don't see this side once it's completed. You want to put your waistband wrong sides down, then put your ruche piece over. So I've just put a pin in either side there, and I'm just going to even out the gathers. We've got a nice amount of gather there. So I'm going to do that to the other 3 sides and then do a line of basting down there. And then once that's done, we just treat both pieces as one piece. So I basted the ends down and then I sewed them together. So what I did is I just serged them separately. I used the lightning stitch there. I'll just need to press that in a minute. Let's kick off this process with some interfacing. So here I'm block fusing, and that's where I just take a whole piece of fabric and interface the whole thing and then cut out my pieces afterwards. This just means that the pattern pieces won't shrink when I add the interfacing to them. Sherpa fabric, you want to make sure the nap's going in the right way. So you want the nap going down, or it can go up, but it's got to go on the same way on all your pattern pieces. So now you can see me laying out my pattern piece on the fabric with the right side facing away from the fabric piece, and that's just going to make it easier to cut out in a minute. And now you can see me drawing out my pattern piece. I'm tracing around it on the fabric, and that's just going to make it easier to cut out afterwards. I'm working my way all around the pattern piece. Now you can see my thin green lines just about, and I'm pinning the piece so that I can move it up because my table wasn't big enough. So I need to drag it onto the table a bit more so I can continue to draw on it. But hopefully your table is big enough that you don't need to do this. It's probably not the most accurate way of doing things. So now I'm using my professional grade shears. I actually won these in a competition a couple of years ago from Coco Wawa Crafts actually. and they are absolutely brilliant. If you don't have professional shears, just use whatever shears you have, but you want them to be quite sharp. If not, maybe a rotary blade or an X-Acto knife even would be quite a good idea. So there's my back piece done there. Now we're moving on to the front pieces, and I'm cutting them out one piece at a time, and I'm using my rotary cutter here because I gave up drawing out. I have to say there was much more mess using my rotary blade than there was using my shears, and interestingly that you do hear that you should use a blade. So first off, I measured myself from a shoulder to apex, and now I'm going to measure the actual pattern piece. There's my apex there. I'm going to take the measuring tape and measure from the shoulder of the pattern down to the apex, bearing in mind my seam allowance. Now that's going to tell me if my apex is in the right place on the pattern. And I've decided that I need to drop my apex by an inch, but I also want to lengthen my pattern by an inch. So I'm just cutting a horizontal line, and I'm now going to cut it open and place some paper underneath. So I'm drawing a line there to give me a reference for sticking the paper onto that other paper. Technical term there. Once I've done that, I'm working out an inch up from there to draw another line, and that'll give me a reference where I need to add the top piece, making sure to line the pattern pieces up properly. Now I'm just truing the edges to make sure I'm just finishing cutting out my pattern piece. So now I need to grade between sizes because my hips are 2 inches bigger than the underarm. So what I'm doing here is I'm just putting my dart together so that I can merge those two sizes easily and see that they are meeting with each other. So I'm just drawing my line in there, and because the dart is closed, that just makes it a lot easier. If you're new to sewing and you're first sewing darts, it can be quite helpful to draw 3 lines. As you can see here, I've got the 2 legs and I've drawn a centre line. That centre line is going to be really helpful in a minute, because when you fold it over, you'll be able to see where the fold line should be, i.e. here. You want to pinch where the apex is and put a pin there. This will tell you where you need to stop sewing. Fold and pin the other end on the line, and you should see where it naturally folds is where that centre line is you drew. Now you just want to sew down your leg, not literally, but metaphorically, your leg of your dart. So now I'm just setting up my sewing machine for a gathering stitch. So it's normally at 4.0 tension. I'm whacking it all the way up, which was far too high. You probably just want it up to 5 or 6. Once you've done that and you've put it on a basting stitch, your machine will automatically gather it up like you can see it's doing to mine here.